The divorce papers arrived on their 10th anniversary. Not in the mail, not through a lawyer. Victoria placed them herself on the mahogany dining table, right beside the small velvet box she'd wrapped with trembling hands just hours before. The irony wasn't lost on her one gift to end everything, another that had taken her 3 years to find. James Harrison didn't notice either at first. He was too busy scrolling through his phone, barking orders at someone in Tokyo about a merger that would add another billion to his portfolio. At 42, he'd built an empire that stretched across 6 continents. Hotels, tech companies, real estate developments that reshaped city skylines. Forbes called him the King Midas of modern industry. His competitors called him ruthless. Victoria called him her husband, though lately she wasn't sure what that word meant anymore. "I need you to sign something," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying across the vast dining room of their Manhattan penthouse. He held up one finger. Wait, always wait. She'd been waiting for a decade. When he finally lowered the phone, his steel-gray eyes flicked toward her with the same impatience he showed his assistants. "What is it?" "I have a call with London in 5 minutes. It's our anniversary." She pushed the velvet box toward him. 10 years. James glanced at his watch, a Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's homes. "Right, I had Rachel send flowers to your office. Did they not arrive?" Rachel, his secretary, who picked out gifts, signed cards, remembered birthdays, who'd probably selected Victoria's engagement ring too, now that she thought about it. They arrived. Victoria's hand moved to the manila folder beside the box. "This is for you too." 10 years earlier, Victoria Chun had been someone else entirely. Not Chun, she'd taken his name, become Victoria Harrison, as if shedding her identity would help her fit into his world. She'd been 25, fresh from art school, working at a small gallery in Brooklyn that barely paid rent. Her apartment had been a 5th-floor walk-up with radiators that clanged like ghosts and a view of a brick wall. She'd loved it. James had walked into the gallery on a Thursday afternoon, unexpected and utterly out of place in his 3-piece suit among the abstract paintings and bohemian crowd. He'd been looking for art for his new hotel in Dubai. Something bold, he'd told her. Something that makes a statement. She'd shown him a piece by an unknown artist, a massive canvas of shattered mirrors reflecting fragmented images of the city. "This one makes people uncomfortable," she'd explained. "It forces them to see themselves broken apart, reconstructed differently. That's what travel does, isn't it? Breaks you down, rebuilds you." He'd bought it on the spot. And asked her to dinner. The courtship had been a whirlwind. Private jets to Paris for lunch. Front row seats at Fashion Week. A proposal on a yacht off the Amalfi Coast with a ring so large it felt heavy with obligation. Her friends had squealed with excitement. Her mother had cried with joy. "You'll never have to worry about money again," she'd said, as if worry and love were mutually exclusive. Victoria had been dazzled. Not by the money, though it was impossible to ignore, but by him. James had been different then, attentive, curious about her thoughts, her dreams. He'd asked about her own art, the paintings she created in her spare time. "Show me your world," he'd whispered once, between kisses in a hotel room overlooking the Seine. She'd thought she was marrying a man who wanted to know her. She'd been wrong. The transformation had been gradual, like hypothermia. You don't realize you're freezing until you're already numb. First came the move from her cramped but beloved studio to his penthouse. "You'll have space for a proper art room," he'd promised. The room became a storage space for his business files within a year. Then came the social obligations. Charity galas where her job was to smile and look elegant in designer gowns that cost more than she used to make in 6 months. Business dinners where wives were ornaments, expected to nod politely while men discussed deals and empires. "You're representing me now," James had said, not unkindly, but as if it were obvious. "Appearance matters in my world." Her world had disappeared piece by piece. The gallery closed, gentrification had priced them out. Her artist friends drifted away, unable to relate to her new life of drivers and doormen and black tie events. She tried to keep painting, but the canvases remained blank. What was there to express when your life had become a performance? By year 3, she'd become proficient in the role. The perfect corporate wife. She knew which fork to use, which donors to flatter, which rivals' wives to befriend for strategic advantage. She ran his household with the efficiency of a CEO, managed his social calendar, hosted dinner parties that furthered his business interests. She'd become an extension of his empire. She just wasn't sure she was still herself. The loneliness had been the hardest part. Not physical loneliness, the penthouse was always full of staff, and she attended dozens of events each month. But the loneliness of being unseen. James looked at her the way he looked at his hotels. Something he owned. Something that reflected his success. Something to be maintained but not truly known. When had he last asked about her day? Her thoughts? Her dreams? When had she last had dreams? The answer sat in the velvet box on the table. 3 years of searching. 3 years of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could reach the man she'd married. That she could remind him of who they'd been before the empire consumed everything. James picked up the box with the enthusiasm of someone checking mail. He opened it without ceremony, glanced at the contents, and his expression shifted to something between confusion and disdain. Inside was a small wooden figurine, no more than 4 inches tall. It was carved in the shape of a horse crude by modern standards, the details worn smooth by time. It sat on a small velvet cushion, unimpressive and clearly old. "What is this?" James asked, his tone carrying the edge of disappointment. "It's a Han Dynasty tomb horse," Victoria said softly. "From the 2nd century. I'd been looking for one like this since our first anniversary." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You've been looking for a wooden toy for 9 years? Do you remember the Metropolitan Museum?" she asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Our 3rd date? We went on a Sunday morning because you said you wanted to see the world through my eyes. We spent an hour in the Asian art wing and you stopped in front of a Han Dynasty tomb guardian. You said, 'Victoria, I don't have time for a trip down memory lane.'" He set the box down with a soft click that sounded like a door closing. "I appreciate the thought, but I'm not really a collector of trinkets. If you wanted to get me something for our anniversary. You know, I've been eyeing that Rothko piece at Sotheby's. Now that's a real investment. Trinket." The word hung in the air between them. She'd spent 3 years searching. Had contacted museums, private collectors, auction houses across Asia. Had learned Mandarin to communicate with dealers in Beijing and Xi'an. Had traveled twice to China on her only trips without him, her only adventures in years. She'd studied Han Dynasty burial practices, learned to authenticate ancient artifacts, immersed herself in a world that reminded her she could still learn, still grow, still be curious about something. The figurine wasn't just rare. It was the exact type of piece that had been displayed next to that tomb guardian at the Met. The same artisan style, the same period, the same spiritual significance. She'd found it in a small shop in Shanghai, owned by an elderly woman whose grandfather had excavated it decades ago. The woman had cried when Victoria explained why she wanted it, had refused to sell it at first because she wanted it to go to someone who understood its meaning. "You said that horse represented journey and loyalty," Victoria continued, her voice barely a whisper. "You said those were the qualities you most admired. You said, I say a lot of things." James stood, pocketing his phone. "Look, it's a nice gesture, but let's be honest. I'm not going to display a wooden horse in my office. What would clients think? I appreciate the sentiment, but maybe next time consider practical gifts. Speaking of which, what did you need me to sign?" She pushed the manila folder toward him. James opened it, his eyes scanning the first page quickly. Then slower. Then he looked up, and for the first time in years, she had his complete attention. "Divorce papers?" Yes. The word was simple, final. It had taken her 3 years to find the horse, and 3 minutes to say yes to the lawyer who'd asked if she was sure about this. She'd never been more sure of anything in her life. James laughed, actually laughed. It was a sharp, brittle sound. "Is this because I didn't like your gift? Are you really that petty?" "It's not about the gift, James." "Then what?" He spread his arms wide, gesturing to the penthouse around them. 20-foot ceilings. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Original art on every wall. What exactly are you unhappy about? You live in a home worth $50 million. You have unlimited credit cards. You travel the world. What more could you possibly want? You, she said simply. "I want you." He stared at her as if she'd spoken a foreign language. "When is the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about your business or social calendar?" she asked. "When's the last time you asked about my day, my thoughts? When's the last time you looked at me and saw a person instead of an accessory?" "You're being dramatic," he waved his hand dismissively. "All marriages settle into routines. This is what adult relationships look like." "No," Victoria said, and her voice was stronger now. "This is what death looks like. Slow and comfortable and utterly empty." Jesus Christ. James ran his hand through his salt and pepper hair. Is this about us having kids again? I've told you, this isn't about kids. This is about us. There is no us anymore, James. There's you, your empire, and the woman you hired to play your wife at parties. I didn't hire you. I married you. Did you? Or did you acquire me like you acquire everything else? Another asset to display. Another piece that completes the picture of the successful billionaire. His jaw tightened. I've given you everything. You've given me nothing that matters. The silence stretched between them, vast as the penthouse itself. And what? James finally said, his voice cold now. You think you're going to leave and what? Go back to that shitty Brooklyn gallery? Go back to being broke and anonymous? You've gotten used to this life, Victoria. We both know you're not going anywhere. It was the cruelty in his voice that confirmed she'd made the right choice. Not anger, she could have worked with anger, but dismissal. The absolute certainty that she was bluffing, that she needed him, that she was nothing without his money and his name. I'm going to stay with my sister, she said calmly. My lawyer will be in touch about the settlement negotiations. I'm not asking for much. Just enough to start over. James picked up the wooden horse, examining it with new eyes. This thing is probably worthless, you know? Some tourist trap junk. That's always been your problem, Victoria. You see meaning in worthless things. You romanticize garbage and call it art. He tossed the figurine back in the box carelessly, and Victoria flinched as it rattled against the velvet. Sign the papers, James. No. He closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. You want a divorce? You're going to have to fight for it. And let me tell you something about fighting me. I never lose. You'll get nothing, not a penny. I'll tie this up in court for years if I have to. I have the best lawyers in the country, and you have what? Your sister's couch and some delusional fantasy about finding yourself? He grabbed his jacket from the chair. I have a flight to Singapore. When I get back, I expect you to have come to your senses. And for God's sake, return that wooden toy. Get your money back. Buy yourself something nice instead. Something with actual value. The door slammed behind him, and Victoria stood alone in the vast penthouse, surrounded by $50 million of real estate and feeling poorer than she'd ever felt in her Brooklyn walk-up. She picked up the velvet box, cradling the small horse in her palm. Its wood was smooth, warm against her skin. She could feel the centuries in it, the hands that had carved it, the tomb it had guarded, the journey it had made to reach her. You're not worthless, she whispered to it. Neither am I. Victoria did go to her sister's. Emily lived in Queens, in a 2-bedroom apartment that could have fit inside Victoria's closet. But it felt like home in a way the penthouse never had. There were dishes in the sink and magazines on the coffee table and the comforting chaos of real life. He actually said that? Emily asked, pouring them both wine. About tourist trap junk? Word for word. That pompous ass. Emily raised her glass. To freedom from pompous asses. They clinked glasses, but Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. James had been right about one thing: his lawyers were the best. Her own lawyer, Patricia Chan, no relation, despite the shared surname, had called that morning with grim news. He's going for a full contested divorce, Patricia had explained. He's claiming you signed a prenuptial agreement that limits you to $100,000 and whatever personal gifts he gave you during the marriage. I never signed a prenup. He has one with your signature on it. Victoria had gone cold. That's impossible. We'll have a handwriting analyst look at it, but Victoria, I have to be honest with you. If this document holds up, and if he fights this the way he's threatening to, you could walk away with almost nothing. He's already frozen your credit cards. The penthouse is in his name only. Your bank accounts were joint, and he's moved all the funds to accounts in his sole name. That's legal? Unfortunately, in New York, during a divorce proceeding, he can claim he's protecting marital assets. We can fight it, but it takes time. Do you have any assets of your own? Anything in your name only? Victoria had looked at the velvet box sitting on Emily's coffee table. Just a wooden horse. Patricia had sighed. Get a job, Victoria. Find a way to support yourself. This is going to be a long fight. Now sitting in Emily's apartment, Victoria felt the full weight of her situation. She'd given up her career, her friends, her identity. She had no recent work experience beyond managing a household, which looked like nothing on a resume. She had a degree in art history that felt ancient and useless. She was 35 years old and starting from zero. No less than zero. She was starting from negative, because James was actively working to destroy her. What about the horse? Emily asked, nodding toward the box. You said it was rare. Could you sell it? Victoria shook her head. I can't. It's the only thing I have that reminds me why I married him. The man who looked at that tomb guardian and talked about loyalty and journey. I know that man is gone, but I can't let go of the proof he once existed. I know. Victoria. Emily's voice was gentle. You need money. You need a lawyer. You need to be practical. Victoria opened the box, looking at the small figurine. But not yet. Let me have this one thing that's mine. Just for a little while longer. That night, unable to sleep on Emily's couch, Victoria did what she always did when anxious. She researched. She pulled out her laptop and began searching for information about Han Dynasty tomb horses, partly to distract herself and partly because she wanted to know everything about the one thing she'd been allowed to keep. The search results were typical at first: museum pieces, academic articles, auction listings for similar items. She scrolled through pages of images comparing them to her own figurine. Most were stone or ceramic. Wooden examples were rarer wood, didn't survive 2,000 years easily. The few wooden pieces that had survived were mostly in museum collections. Then she found something that made her sit up straight. It was a blog post from a Beijing antiquities expert named Dr. Liu Wei, written in a mix of Mandarin and English. He'd posted about a recent discovery at an excavation site in Shanxi province. They'd found a tomb that had been sealed for nearly 2,000 years, belonging to a minor Han Dynasty official. Inside were the typical burial goods: ceramic jars, bronze mirrors, jade pieces, and 12 wooden horses. Dr. Liu's post was technical, filled with archaeological jargon. But what caught Victoria's attention was a single line, half buried in the middle of a paragraph. Most remarkable is the preservation of the original cinnabar pigment on several figurines, indicating these were commissioned pieces from the imperial workshops, not provincial craftsmen. Such pieces were reserved for high-ranking officials with direct connections to the imperial court. Victoria's heart began to beat faster. She pulled out her phone and turned on the flashlight, examining her horse carefully. The wood was dark with age, but in the crevices, yes, there it was. The faintest trace of red pigment, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. Cinnabar. The expensive red pigment that had been worth its weight in gold in ancient China. Used only for the most important pieces. She kept reading, falling down a research rabbit hole that lasted until dawn. By the time Emily woke up for work, Victoria had filled 3 notebook pages with names, dates, and contact information. You look terrible, Emily said, pouring coffee. Did you sleep at all? Victoria's voice shook. I think my horse might be important, like really important. How important? Victoria showed her the research, explaining about the cinnabar, the imperial workshops, the rarity of wooden pieces. Emily listened, her expression shifting from skepticism to interest. So what does this mean? I need to have it authenticated, properly, by experts. Victoria stood, pacing the small apartment. When I bought it, the woman in Shanghai said it had been in her family since her grandfather's time. He was an archaeologist in the 1960s. She showed me papers, but they were in Chinese and I couldn't read them all. I just trusted her. And if it is authentic, what's it worth? Victoria pulled up an auction result on her laptop. Emily whistled low. Okay, so you need to get this thing appraised. Emily, I need to do it quietly. Victoria's mind was racing now. If James finds out this might be valuable, he'll claim it's a marital asset. He'll say he paid for it, which technically he did. I used the household account when I bought it in Shanghai, but it was a gift to him, which he rejected. He told me to return it. He called it worthless. Victoria felt something stirring in her chest. Not quite hope. She'd learned better than to hope, but something close. Possibility. He literally threw it back at me and said it had no value. So it's yours. Legally? I don't know, but morally? Victoria picked up the small horse, holding it up to the morning light. This is mine. This represents 3 years of my life, 3 years of trying to hold on to who I was, 3 years of searching for something real in a relationship that had become fake. He doesn't get to take this too, Emily grinned. Okay, little sister. Let's find out what you've got. Dr. Helena Young's office at Columbia University was everything Victoria remembered from her art school days. Cluttered, chaotic, smelling of old books and tea. The professor herself looked exactly the same 70 years old. White hair pulled back in a bun, glasses perpetually perched on her nose. Victoria Chan, Dr. Young stood, embracing her. It's been what? 10 years? 12. I was in your Asian art seminar, of course. You wrote that brilliant paper on Song Dynasty landscape painting. I still use it as an example for my students. Dr. Young gestured to a chair. Your email said you had something you wanted me to examine? Victoria carefully placed the velvet box on the desk and opened it. Dr. Young's reaction was immediate. She went very still, then reached for her glasses and a magnifying glass. May I? Please. The professor lifted the horse with practiced care, turning it slowly in her hands. She was silent for a long moment, examining every angle, every detail. Then she walked to her desk and switched on a high-intensity lamp, positioning the figurine beneath it. Where did you acquire this? Her voice was carefully neutral. A shop in Shanghai. 3 years ago. The owner said it had been in her family since the 1960s. Her grandfather was an archaeologist. Do you remember the shop's name? The owner's name? Victoria pulled out her phone, scrolling through old photos until she found one of the shop's exterior. It was in the Hangkou district. The owner was Mrs. Wang Shufen. Her grandfather was Wang Chenming. Dr. Young's eyebrows shot up. Wang Chenming, the archaeologist? You know him? Know of him. He was one of the pioneers of modern Chinese archaeology. Worked on major excavation sites in Shanxi province in the 1950s and 60s. Dr. Young was looking at the horse with new intensity now. Victoria, do you know what you have here? I think it's a Han Dynasty tomb horse. Maybe from an imperial workshop. You think correctly. But it's more than that. Dr. Young pulled out her phone and made a call, speaking rapid Mandarin. When she hung up, she looked at Victoria seriously. I have a colleague coming over. Dr. James Wu, he's our expert on Han Dynasty artifacts. I need him to confirm what I'm seeing because if I'm right ... double quotes, she trailed off, shaking her head. If you're right, what? Let's wait for Dr. Wu. He arrived within 20 minutes. A slight man in his 60s who moved with quick, precise energy. Dr. Young showed him the horse without preamble. Victoria watched his expression cycle through curiosity, surprise, disbelief, and something like awe. The two professors began speaking in rapid Mandarin, too fast for Victoria to follow. They examined the horse with various instruments, a UV light, a digital microscope, tools she couldn't identify. Dr. Wu pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through images, comparing them to the figurine. Finally, after what felt like hours, they turned to Victoria. Miss Chun, Dr. Wu said, his English perfect but heavily accented. Where exactly in Shanghai did you purchase this? Victoria repeated the story, adding every detail she could remember. Mrs. Wang's shop, the papers she'd been shown, the story of her grandfather's excavation work. And you said her grandfather was Wang Chenming? Dr. Wu asked. Yes. The two professors exchanged a look. Miss Chun, Dr. Young said carefully, are you aware of the Mawangri excavation? The Han Dynasty tomb site? Yes, we studied it briefly in my Asian art classes. In 1972, archaeologists excavated 3 tombs at Mawangdi in Changsha. It was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. The tombs contained incredibly well-preserved artifacts, including the famous silk painting and the world's oldest medical texts. Dr. Young paused. But before Mawangdui, there were other excavations, smaller sites, less publicized, particularly during the Cultural Revolution when many archaeological projects were disrupted or shut down entirely. I don't understand, Dr. Wu took over. Wang Chenming was part of a team that excavated a tomb in Shanxi province in 1966, just as the Cultural Revolution was beginning. The site was shut down abruptly, and many artifacts were scattered, lost, or hidden to protect them from destruction. Official records from that period are incomplete. Victoria's mouth went dry. Are you saying, we're saying, Dr. Young interrupted gently, that this figurine matches the style and technique of pieces that would have come from that excavation? But more than that, she pulled up an image on her tablet. Look at this. It was a black and white photograph, clearly old. It showed several wooden figurines laid out on a table, horses, 12 of them. Different sizes, different poses, but clearly a set. This photo was taken at the Shanxi excavation site in 1966, Dr. Wu explained. It's one of the few surviving documentation photographs from that dig. These 12 horses were found in the tomb of a high-ranking official named Zhao Ming who served as an imperial advisor to Emperor Wu during the Western Han Dynasty. They were placed in his tomb as guardians and companions for his journey to the afterlife. Victoria stared at the photograph, then at her horse. The resemblance was unmistakable. After the dig was shut down, Dr. Wu continued, 11 of the horses were eventually recovered and sent to museums. One ended up in the Shanxi History Museum. 4 went to the Palace Museum in Beijing. 3 to the Shanghai Museum. 2 to private collectors who later donated them to institutions. 1 was sold at auction in Hong Kong in the 1980s and is now in a private collection in Taiwan. That's 11, Victoria whispered. Exactly. The 12th horse was never recovered. It was presumed lost or destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. Dr. Young's eyes were bright with excitement. Until now. The room seemed to spin. Victoria sat down heavily. If this is authentic, she said slowly. If this is really the 12th horse from that set. Oh, it's authentic, Dr. Wu said firmly. I'd stake my reputation on it. The wood type, the carving style, the tool marks, the residual cinnabar pigment in the recesses, it all matches. But more than that, there's something specific about these 12 horses that makes them identifiable. He pointed to the horse's left rear leg. Victoria had noticed the marking before, but had assumed it was just age damage, a small carved symbol, almost worn away. Each of the 12 horses had a unique mark, Dr. Wu explained. A different zodiac animal carved into the left rear leg. The archaeologists documented this before the site was shut down. We have records of 11 of the marks. The 12th, the missing horse, was supposed to bear the mark of the rabbit. He handed Victoria the magnifying glass. She held it up to the horse's leg, her hands shaking. There it was. Barely visible, worn nearly smooth by time and handling, but unmistakable once you knew to look for it. A rabbit, crouched, ancient and patient and waiting. Oh my God, Victoria breathed. Miss Chun, Dr. Young said seriously, this is an artifact of enormous historical significance. It completes a set that has been incomplete for nearly 60 years. It provides closure to a piece of archaeological history. It belongs in a museum, ideally reunited with its 11 companions. How much? Victoria asked. How much is it worth? The professors exchanged another look. That's complicated, Dr. Wu said. As a standalone piece, a Han Dynasty wooden tomb figure from an imperial workshop in this condition, with documented provenance? Priceless, Dr. Young finished. Truly, literally priceless. Museums would negotiate, collectors would fight wars. The Chinese government might even get involved. There are laws about cultural artifacts leaving the country. Though since this piece has been in private hands since the 1960s, that gets murky. But if I had to put a number on it, Dr. Wu said carefully, if I had to give you an auction estimate for what this might sell for to a serious collector or museum, I'd say minimum $2 million. Possibly as high as $5 million depending on the bidding. The number hit Victoria like a physical blow. $5 million. She'd married a billionaire, lived in a $50 million penthouse, worn jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But none of it had been hers. None of it had meant anything. This wooden horse, this trinket that James had mocked and dismissed, this tourist trap junk that he told her to return for her money back. This was worth more than she'd ever owned in her life. This was her freedom. I need this authenticated officially, Victoria said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. I need documentation. I need proof that this is what you say it is. We can do that, Dr. Young said. It will take time. We'll need to run tests, compare it to the other 11 horses, contact the museums that house them. We'll need to verify the provenance through Mrs. Wang, confirm the chain of custody from her grandfather's estate. But yes, we can provide you with official authentication. How long? 2 weeks, maybe 3. We'll need to be thorough. Victoria pulled out her phone and called Patricia Chun. Patricia, it's Victoria. Remember how you asked if I had any assets of my own? The wooden horse? The wooden horse is worth approximately $5 million. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Victoria, Patricia finally said, her voice careful, I'm going to need you to explain that to me very slowly and in great detail. And then I'm going to need you to hide that horse somewhere very, very safe. Because if James finds out about this, he won't, not yet. Not until we have everything documented and secured. Victoria looked at the small figurine sitting under the bright lamp, its carved rabbit mark catching the light. Not until it's too late for him to do anything about it. She hung up and turned back to the professors. Do whatever tests you need to do. Document everything. And please keep this absolutely confidential. No one can know about this until I say so. Dr. Young smiled, the expression sharp with understanding. We're academics, Miss Chun. We know how to keep secrets. Besides, she gestured to the horse, we're just as invested in this as you are now. This is the find of a lifetime for us too. Victoria left Columbia with the velvet box in her bag, and her mind spinning. She took 3 different subway trains to make sure no one was following her, then walked the last 6 blocks to Emily's apartment, clutching her bag close to her chest. Her phone buzzed. A text from James. Where are you? Come home. We need to talk. She deleted it without responding. Another text, moments later. Don't be childish. You can't survive without me. Victoria looked at her bag, at the small box that contained her future. She typed back, watch me. The story continues with rising tension as James discovers the horse's value, leading to a legal battle and shocking revelations about the past decade of their marriage. Victoria will face her greatest challenges yet, leading to a climactic confrontation and an emotionally powerful resolution. The authentication process took 18 days. 18 days during which Victoria barely slept, jumping at every sound, checking the safe deposit box she de-rented 3 times a day to make sure the horse was still there. Dr. Young and Dr. Wu worked quickly but meticulously, comparing her figurine with the 11 authenticated pieces, running carbon dating tests, examining every microscopic detail. On day 12, Dr. Wu contacted colleagues in Shanghai and confirmed Mrs. Wang's story. Her grandfather, Wang Chenming, had indeed been part of the Shanxi excavation team. He'd taken the 12th horse when the site was shut down during the Cultural Revolution, not to steal it, but to protect it from destruction. He'd hidden it for decades, passing it to his daughter on his deathbed with instructions to find someone who would appreciate its true meaning, not just its monetary value. Mrs. Wang had chosen Victoria. She said you cried when you held it, Dr. Wu explained over the phone. She said you understood what it represented, journey and loyalty. She knew you would protect it. Victoria had cried again, hearing that. On day 18, she sat in Patricia Chun's office as her lawyer reviewed the final authentication documents. Certificates from Columbia University. Letters from the Palace Museum in Beijing confirming that the figurine matched the missing 12th piece from the Xiaoming tomb set. Expert testimonies from 3 internationally recognized authorities on Han Dynasty artifacts. Carbon dating results. Provenance documentation traced back to 1966. This is airtight, Patricia said, shuffling through the papers with barely contained excitement. This is more than airtight, this is bulletproof. You own a piece of Chinese imperial history worth conservatively $3 to $5 million. And James can't claim it? He can try. He'll definitely try. But we have several factors in our favor. Patricia ticked them off on her fingers. 1. It was a gift. You gave it to him on your anniversary. He rejected it publicly. You have the security footage from your building showing him leaving that night without the box. 2. He explicitly told you to return it and called it worthless. We can subpoena his phone records. I'm betting he said similar things in texts or emails. 3. The transaction occurred while you were married, but used your own research, your own expertise, your own labor to find and authenticate this piece. That's separate property, not marital property. But I used his money to buy it. From a joint household account, yes. Which means at worst, he could claim half of what you paid for it. Patricia smiled grimly. How much did you pay? $800. So his maximum claim is $400. For a $5 million asset, Patricia leaned back in her chair. Victoria, this changes everything. With this asset, you can fight him. You can hire the best lawyers. You can drag this out as long as he can. You're not powerless anymore. Victoria looked at the authentication documents, at the photographs of her small wooden horse displayed alongside its 11 siblings. In the photos, reunited digitally, if not physically, the 12 horses looked like what they were meant to be, a complete set. A unified whole, protectors for a journey that had lasted 2,000 years. When do we tell him? Victoria asked. Patricia's smile turned sharp. We don't. Not yet. First, we file an amended petition for divorce. We list all marital assets, including this piece, with its full appraised value. We demand a fair settlement. We play it completely by the book. And when his lawyers see that you're not the broke, desperate woman they expected. She tapped the authentication papers. That's when the fun begins. The amended petition was filed on a Friday afternoon. Patricia called on Monday morning. He knows, she said without preamble. His lawyers called at 8 a.m. They want a meeting. Today. That was fast. Fastest response I've ever seen. They're panicking, Victoria. They know they underestimated you. The meeting took place in a conference room in Midtown. Victoria walked in wearing a simple black dress she'd borrowed from Emily, carrying a folder with copies of all the authentication documents. James was already there with his legal team, 3 lawyers in suits that cost more than most people's cars, led by Richard Castellano, the man Vanity Fair had called the divorce assassin. James looked at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger. Not dismissal. Calculation. He was looking at her the way he looked at business rivals. Victoria, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Let's be reasonable about this. I am being reasonable, she replied calmly, taking her seat across from him. I'm asking for a fair settlement. Fair? James laughed, but it sounded forced. You think claiming a $5 million asset is fair? I think claiming ownership of something I found, purchased, and authenticated through my own expertise is fair. Yes, Castellano cleared his throat. Mrs. Harrison, while we acknowledge that you may have discovered an item of some value, the fact remains that said item was purchased using marital funds during your marriage. That makes it marital property, subject to equitable distribution. Patricia didn't miss a beat. The item was purchased for $800. If Mr. Harrison wishes to claim his community property share of that purchase price, we're happy to negotiate. He can have $400. The item is worth $5 million, one of the other lawyers interjected. The item is worth $5 million because Miss Chun spent 3 years researching, searching, and eventually authenticating it using her expertise in art history and Asian antiquities. That expertise, that labor, that knowledge, those are her separate property. The increased value came from her work, not from the marriage. She used marital resources, Castellano argued. She traveled to China twice on trips paid for with marital funds. She traveled to China on her personal time, searching for a gift for her husband, using a joint household account that she had equal right to access. Mr. Harrison certainly didn't object when she was spending that money. He only objects now that he realizes what she found. The argument went back and forth for an hour. Victoria sat quietly, watching James watch her. He kept glancing at the authentication documents in her folder, at the photographs of the 12 horses. She could practically see him calculating, strategizing, looking for an angle. Finally, Castellano called for a recess. The lawyers huddled in the corner, whispering urgently. James stood and walked to the window, looking out over Manhattan. His empire spread out below him in steel and glass. You've gotten smarter, he said without turning around. Victoria didn't respond. I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again. Now he turned, and his expression was cold. You think this horse gives you leverage. Maybe it does. But I have resources you can't imagine. I can make this fight last decades. I can make it cost more than that horse is worth. I can make your life hell. You already did, Victoria said quietly. For 10 years. What's a few more? His jaw tightened. What do you want? I want what I'm entitled to under New York law. A fair division of marital assets minus my separate property, which includes the horse. I want enough to start over. I don't want your empire, James. I just want my freedom. And if I refuse, then we go to court. And every detail of our marriage becomes public record. Every trip you took with your secretary while claiming to be at business conferences. Every time you dismissed me in front of your colleagues. Every time you made me feel worthless. Victoria stood, meeting his eyes. I have nothing to lose anymore. You made sure of that when you froze my accounts and tried to leave me with nothing. But you have an empire built on image and reputation. What happens when the world knows how you treated your wife? It was a bluff, mostly. Victoria had no proof of affairs, no smoking gun. But she knew James. She knew how carefully he guarded his reputation. She knew that even the suspicion of scandal could damage business relationships, scare off investors, tarnish the brand he'd spent decades building. James stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Castellano. Make a deal. The settlement negotiations took 3 weeks. In the end, Victoria walked away with $12 million. Not half of James's wealth, not even close, but enough. Enough to start over. Enough to never have to depend on anyone again. Enough to be free. She kept the horse. James had fought hardest over that. Not because he wanted it. Victoria suspected he would have thrown it in the trash if given the chance, but because losing it meant admitting he'd been wrong. Admitting that something he'd called worthless had more value than he'd imagined. In the end, his lawyers advised him to let it go. Fighting over the horse meant keeping the divorce in court longer, meant more publicity, meant more opportunities for Victoria to make good on her implicit threats about exposing the details of their marriage. "It's just a wooden toy," Castellano had said in one of their final meetings. "Let her have it. You're keeping the penthouse, the art collection, the real assets. Walk away and move on." James had signed the papers without looking at Victoria. On the day the divorce was finalized, Victoria stood in Emily's apartment, her apartment now, which Emily had insisted she keep since Emily was moving in with her fiancé anyway, and looked at the small wooden horse sitting on the mantel. "So what now?" Emily asked. "You're a millionaire. You can do anything, go anywhere, be anyone." Victoria had thought about that question for weeks. With $12 million, she could travel the world. She could buy a brownstone in Brooklyn. She could invest and never work again. She could do nothing for the rest of her life. But the woman who would have chosen that, the woman who'd been so tired, so worn down, so lost, that woman didn't exist anymore. "I'm going to open a gallery," Victoria said. "A real one. Not for famous artists or rich collectors. For people like I used to be. Artists who have something to say but no platform to say it. And I'm going to donate the horse." Emily's eyes widened. "What?" "Victoria, that horse is worth $5 million. I know. Which is why it belongs in a museum, reunited with its siblings. Dr. Young connected me with the Palace Museum in Beijing. They want to bring all 12 horses together for the first time in 60 years, a special exhibition. They're calling it The Journey Home." Victoria smiled. "They've offered to pay for transportation, insurance, authentication, everything. And they want to credit me as the finder and donor. But the money, I don't need $5 million. I need to be someone I'm proud of." Victoria picked up the horse, holding it up to the light one last time. "This horse has been on a journey for 2,000 years. It guarded a tomb. It survived wars and revolutions. It hid in a small shop in Shanghai, waiting for someone to understand its worth. It saved me from a life that was killing me slowly." She looked at Emily, tears streaming down her face now. But she was smiling. "It taught me that value isn't about price. It's about meaning, about purpose. About the journey, not the destination." James thought he could measure everything in money. But some things are priceless because of what they represent, not what they cost. Emily hugged her sister tightly. "Mom and Dad would be so proud of you. I'm proud of me," Victoria whispered. Finally, the exhibition opened 6 months later. Victoria flew to Beijing for the unveiling, and standing in the Palace Museum, surrounded by scholars and historians and art lovers, she watched as the 12 horses were displayed together for the first time since 1966. They were arranged in a circle, facing inward, as they would have been in Zhao Ming's tomb 2,000 years ago. 12 guardians. 12 companions for an eternal journey. Complete at last. Dr. Liu Wei, the Beijing expert whose blog post had started Victoria's research, gave a speech about the historical significance. Dr. Young and Dr. Wu spoke about the authentication process. The museum director talked about cultural heritage and the importance of preservation. Then they introduced Victoria. She stood before the crowd, before the cameras, before the 12 horses, as she told her story. Not all of it, some parts were too personal, too raw. But she told them about searching for 3 years. About wanting to find a gift that meant something. About learning that the things we dismiss as worthless are often the most valuable of all. "These horses were carved to guard a journey into the afterlife," Victoria said, her voice steady. "But for me, this horse," she gestured to the one with the rabbit mark, "guarded my journey back to life. It reminded me who I was before I forgot. It gave me the courage to start over. And now it's home, where it belongs with its family." The applause was thunderous. People approached her afterward, museum curators, collectors, journalists. Everyone wanted to know the story, wanted to hear about the wooden horse that had changed her life. But the moment Victoria would remember most came when an elderly woman approached her near the end of the evening. She was small, elegant, with white hair and kind eyes. She took Victoria's hands in hers and smiled. "I'm Wang Shufen," she said in careful English. "I sold you the horse in Shanghai." Victoria gasped. "Mrs. Wang, I didn't know you'd be here." "The museum invited me when they heard the story. They wanted to honor my grandfather's memory." Mrs. Wang looked at the 12 horses, tears glistening in her eyes. "For 70 years I've kept his secret. I've protected that horse, waiting for the right person. I knew when you came into my shop. I knew you were the one." "How?" Because you cried when I told you the story. Because you understood that some journeys take lifetimes to complete. Because you saw value in something others would call old and worthless. Mrs. Wang squeezed Victoria's hands. My grandfather would be so happy. The 12 guardians are together again. The journey is complete. Victoria hugged the old woman. Both of them crying now, surrounded by 2,000 years of history and the knowledge that sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we do and plan. Victoria's gallery opened in Brooklyn a year after the divorce was finalized. She called it The Journey, a nod to the horse, to her own transformation, to the path every artist travels seeking validation and recognition. The space was everything her old gallery hadn't been. Bright, welcoming, located in a neighborhood that was gentrified but not yet priced out. She offered emerging artists free exhibition space, taking only a small commission on sales. She ran workshops on weekends, teaching art history to kids from local schools. She created mentorship programs, matching young artists with established ones. She painted again. Her own work abstract pieces that captured the feeling of being lost and finding yourself, of breaking apart and rebuilding. They were raw, emotional, nothing like the careful, pretty art that had decorated James's penthouse. Gallery visitors responded to them immediately. Critics praised their honesty. She sold 3 paintings in the first month. Not for millions, she wasn't that kind of artist, and she was okay with that, but she sold them. People wanted her work. People saw value in what she'd created. That felt better than any amount of money. She dated, casually, nothing serious. She'd learned to enjoy her own company, to be complete on her own before inviting someone else into her life. She had dinner with interesting people, went to shows, traveled when she wanted to, not to impress anyone, just because she wanted to see new places. She reconnected with old friends from art school. They'd been cautious at first, unsure if the woman who married a billionaire and lived in a penthouse would still relate to their lives of small apartments and day jobs. But Victoria proved she was still herself, maybe more herself than she'd been in years. Emily got married and Victoria was her maid of honor. She gave a speech at the wedding about journeys and partnerships and making sure you never lose yourself in someone else. Everyone cried. Even Emily's grandmother, who'd been skeptical about the whole thing. You're different, Emily said later that night, both of them tipsy on champagne. Lighter. Like you're not carrying something heavy anymore. I'm not, Victoria agreed. I'm carrying myself. Turns out I'm much lighter than his expectations. Life was good. Not perfect. Victoria had learned that perfect was a trap, a goal that kept you perpetually dissatisfied. But good, real, hers. And then, 15 months after the divorce was finalized, Patricia called. You need to see this, her lawyer said. I'm sending you a link. Victoria opened her laptop and clicked the link. It was a news article from the Wall Street Journal, dated that morning. Harrison Empire in freefall. Billionaire faces fraud allegations. She read the article twice, barely believing what she was seeing. James Harrison was being investigated by the SEC for securities fraud, tax evasion, and falsification of company records. Multiple whistleblowers had come forward, former employees, business partners, people who'd been too afraid to speak out before. They alleged that James had been cooking the books for years, inflating asset values, hiding debts, creating shell companies to disguise losses. The investigation had started quietly 6 months ago but had exploded into public view when federal agents raided the Harrison Group headquarters. They'd seized computers, documents, records going back a decade. They'd frozen his accounts, issued subpoenas, begun interviewing everyone who'd ever worked with him. His empire was collapsing. The article estimated he could lose everything. Not just his wealth, but his freedom. If the allegations were proven, he was looking at potential prison time. Victoria should have felt vindicated, triumphant. Part of her did, the part that remembered how he treated her, how he tried to leave her with nothing, how he'd mocked her gift and dismissed her worth. But mostly she just felt sad. Sad for the man he could have been. Sad for the decades she'd wasted trying to reach someone who built walls too high to scale. Sad for all of it. She called Patricia back. Did you know about this? I suspected something was off during the divorce proceedings. Some of the asset valuations didn't make sense. But I didn't have proof, and I wasn't looking to build a criminal case. I just wanted to get you a fair settlement and get you out. The $12 million came from liquid accounts that appeared to have been legitimate. You're fine, Victoria. You got out before the house of cards collapsed. Victoria hung up and sat in her studio, the spare bedroom of her apartment that she'd Converted into a workspace, nothing like the vast empty room in the penthouse but infinitely more productive. She looked at her latest painting, still in progress. It showed 12 horses in a circle, but they were abstract now, more feeling than form. Journey and loyalty. Completion and wholeness. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "I need to talk to you. Please." James. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she deleted it. She'd taken that journey already. She'd learned those lessons, she'd found her way home. Whatever journey James was on now, he'd have to take it alone. 2 years after the divorce, Victoria received an invitation to speak at Columbia University's Art History Department. Dr. Young wanted her to guest lecture about the intersection of art, authentication and personal transformation, about how finding the horse had changed her life. Victoria almost declined. She wasn't an academic. She wasn't even a successful artist by conventional standards. Her gallery was thriving, but she wasn't wealthy, wasn't famous, wasn't the kind of person who typically gave lectures at Ivy League universities. But then she thought about the woman she'd been 4 years ago. The woman who'd stood in that vast penthouse feeling worthless. Who'd held a small wooden horse and wondered if she'd ever find her way back to herself. That woman would have wanted to hear this story. So Victoria said yes. The lecture hall was packed. Students, faculty, visitors. Victoria had prepared a presentation with slides, images of the horse, documentation of her research, photos from the Beijing exhibition. But when she stood at the podium, looking out at all those faces, she put her notes aside. "I want to tell you about a gift," she began. And about learning the difference between price and value. She told them everything: the marriage, the isolation, the 3-year search for something meaningful, the rejection, the divorce, the authentication, the discovery that changed everything. "But here's the thing," she said, coming to her conclusion. "Everyone thinks this story is about the horse, about finding something worth millions that someone thought was worthless. And that's part of it. But the real story is this: I thought I was searching for a gift for my husband. I thought I was trying to connect with him, to remind him of who he'd been. But I was actually searching for myself." She pulled up a slide showing all 12 horses together in the Beijing Museum. These horses were meant to guard a journey to the afterlife. But they taught me about the journey back to life. They taught me that transformation isn't instant. It takes time, patience, persistence. They taught me that value isn't determined by others' opinions. They taught me that sometimes the things we dismiss as worthless are actually priceless. She looked out at the audience, at the young faces watching her. "Most of you will graduate and feel pressure to define success by conventional standards. Money, status, impressive titles and corner offices. You'll be tempted to trade parts of yourself for those things, to become what others expect rather than who you are. And maybe that works for some people. But I'm here to tell you there's another path. The path where you decide your own worth, where you define your own success, where you choose authenticity over image, meaning over money, journey over destination." She smiled. "And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you'll find a small wooden horse that reminds you of all of this when you forget." The applause was overwhelming. Students swarmed her afterward with questions, comments, stories of their own struggles with identity and purpose. A young woman, maybe 22, approached her with tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," the student whispered. "I've been planning to marry my boyfriend after graduation because he has a good job and my parents approve. But I don't love him. Not really. I thought I was being practical. But I was just being afraid." Victoria hugged her. "Fear is the most expensive thing you can pay for. Trust me, I paid for a decade of it." As she left the lecture hall, Dr. Young caught up with her. "That was remarkable, Victoria. Have you considered writing a book about this experience?" "A book? A book? Your story resonates with people. With women especially, but not only women. Anyone who's felt trapped by expectations, who's lost themselves trying to be what others wanted. Anyone who's had to choose between security and authenticity." Dr. Young smiled. "You have something important to say. You should say it to a wider audience." Victoria thought about that as she walked through campus. Past students hurrying to classes, professors deep in discussion, the whole vibrant chaos of academic life. She'd loved this world once. She'd lost it. She'd found her way back to it in a different form. Maybe a book. Maybe that was the next part of her journey. 3 years after the divorce, on what would have been her 13th anniversary, Victoria stood in her gallery hosting an opening for a young artist named Keiko, a Japanese immigrant who created stunning ceramic pieces inspired by her grandmother's folk tales. The gallery was packed. The artist was radiant. 3 pieces had already sold. This was what success looked like now. Not billions in the bank, but connection, community, creation, purpose. Victoria's phone rang. Emily. Turn. On the news, her sister said without preamble. Channel 7. Victoria stepped into her office and switched on the small TV she kept for moments like this. The news anchor was reporting on a federal courthouse downtown. Today sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. James Harrison, once worth an estimated $3.2 billion, has lost his entire fortune to government seizures and civil settlements. In a statement, prosecutors called it one of the largest financial frauds in New York history. The screen showed James being led from the courthouse, hands cuffed, surrounded by reporters and photographers. He looked older than his 45 years, gray, diminished. Nothing like the man who dismissed her gift with such casual cruelty. Victoria felt a pang of something not quite sympathy, but a recognition of shared humanity. He'd built an empire on lies, and it had crushed him. She'd built a life on truth, and it had freed her. "You okay?" Emily asked on the phone. "Yeah," Victoria said softly. "I really am." She turned off the TV and went back to the gallery where Keiko was explaining her artistic process to a captivated audience. Where the art on the walls represented years of struggle and triumph and refusal to give up. Where people were connecting with beauty and meaning and each other. This was her empire now. Built not on money or status or image, but on authenticity and purpose and the courage to value what truly mattered. She'd learned it from a small wooden horse that taught her about journeys. She'd learned it from a husband who taught her about the cost of losing yourself. She'd learned it from her own reflection in the mirror, the day she finally recognized the woman looking back. That night, Victoria went home to her small apartment in Brooklyn. She poured a glass of wine. She sat at her easel and painted until dawn, not because she had to, not because anyone was waiting for it, but because she wanted to, because she had something to say and the freedom to say it. On her mantel sat a framed photograph from the Beijing exhibition. 12 wooden horses in a circle, reunited after 60 years. Guardians of journeys completed and begun. Her horse, the one with the rabbit mark, was positioned facing the camera. Victoria had asked the museum photographer to frame the shot that way. A reminder, a promise to herself. The journey isn't about the destination. It's about having the courage to begin, to search, to discover, to value what others dismiss, to choose yourself over comfort, to understand that the most priceless things in life are the ones that help you become who you truly are. Victoria raised her wine glass to the photograph. "Thank you," she whispered to the little wooden horse that had saved her life. Thank you for the journey. In the morning, she'd open her gallery. She'd mentor her artists. She'd create her own work. She'd live her life on her own terms, in her own way, by her own definitions of success. But tonight, she simply sat in her small apartment, surrounded by her own art, and her own choices and her own hard-won freedom, and felt something she hadn't felt in over a decade. Complete. The horse had taught her about journeys. But in the end, the most important journey was the one back to herself. And that journey, unlike a wooden figure from 2,000 years ago, was truly priceless. 5 years after the divorce, Victoria received a letter that would change everything one more time. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who insisted on a signature. The envelope was thick, expensive paper, with a law firm's embossed letterhead she didn't recognize. Her first instinct was worry. Was James suing her from prison? Had something gone wrong with the settlement? She opened it at her kitchen table, coffee growing cold beside her. "Dear Miss Chun, we represent the estate of Mrs. Wang Shufen, who passed away peacefully last month in Shanghai at the age of 89. In her will, she left specific instructions regarding you. We ask that you contact our Beijing office at your earliest convenience to discuss a matter of significant importance." Victoria's hands trembled. Mrs. Wang, the woman who'd sold her the horse. The woman who'd understood, who'd chosen her, who'd cried with her in Beijing when the 12 guardians were reunited. She called the number immediately. The conversation that followed left her speechless. Mrs. Wang had left Victoria something in her will. Not money, though there was a modest sum to cover travel expenses. Something else. Something that required Victoria to come to Shanghai in person. "What is it?" Victoria asked the lawyer, her Mandarin more fluent now after years of study. Mrs. Wang's instructions were explicit. The lawyer replied. We are to show you something and let you decide what to do with it. She said you would understand. She said you were the only one who could understand. 3 weeks later, Victoria stood in a storage facility in Shanghai's Hongkou district, the same neighborhood where Mrs. Wang's shop had been. The shop was gone, now demolished to make way for a new apartment complex. But this storage unit had survived. The lawyer unlocked the door and gestured for Victoria to enter. Inside, covered in dust cloths, were wooden crates, dozens of them. The lawyer pulled back one cloth, then another, revealing what lay beneath. Victoria stopped breathing. Artifacts. Ancient Chinese artifacts. Dozens of them. Perhaps hundreds. Ceramic vessels from the Tang dynasty. Bronze mirrors from the Zhou period. Jade pieces that gleamed even under the harsh fluorescent lights. Paintings on silk that had somehow survived centuries. And wooden figurines, not horses, but humans, animals, guardians, all carefully preserved, all clearly ancient. What is this? Victoria whispered. The lawyer handed her a letter, yellowed with age. Mrs. Wang left this for you. It explains everything. Victoria's hands shook as she unfolded the paper. It was written in Chinese in Mrs. Wang's careful handwriting. Dear Victoria, if you are reading this, I have completed my own journey. I hope it was as meaningful as the one you helped me complete. My grandfather, Wang Chenming, spent his life protecting these pieces. During the Cultural Revolution, when so much of our heritage was being destroyed, he and a small group of archaeologists worked in secret to save what they could. They couldn't save everything, so much was lost, but they saved these. For 50 years, these artifacts have been hidden. My grandfather passed them to my mother. My mother passed them to me. We could not donate them to museums. The political situation was too dangerous. We could not sell them. They would have been seized or destroyed. So we kept them safe, waiting. Waiting for what? I did not know until you walked into my shop. You understood that value is not measured in money. You understood that some things are priceless because of what they represent. You understood that preservation matters more than profit. This is why I sold you the horse. This was a test, though you did not know it. When I heard that you donated the horse to the Palace Museum instead of selling it for millions, I knew I had chosen correctly. You passed the test. These pieces belong to China. They belong to history. They should be in museums where scholars can study them and people can appreciate them. But I needed to know they would go to someone who would protect them, not exploit them. That someone is you. I am leaving these artifacts in your care. Do with them what you did with the horse. Help them find their way home. Let them complete their journey. Thank you for showing an old woman that there is still honor in this world. Your friend Wang Shufen Victoria read the letter 3 times. Then she sat down on a crate and cried. The lawyer waited patiently. Finally, Victoria looked up at him. How many pieces are there? We've done a preliminary inventory. 473 artifacts spanning multiple dynasties. Some duplicates, but many unique pieces. Mrs. Wang kept meticulous records. Her grandfather's excavation notes, provenance documentation, everything needed to authenticate them. And she left all of this to me? She left them in your care, with the instruction that you should help them find their way home. She was very specific that you should not feel obligated to keep them. She trusted you to make the right decision. Victoria stood and walked among the crates, gently lifting corners of dust cloths, seeing the treasures beneath. Each piece was a fragment of history. Each one had been protected for decades by people who valued heritage over wealth. Each one had been waiting for this moment. I need to make some calls, Victoria said. The process took 18 months. Victoria worked with Dr. Young, Dr. Wu, and a team of international experts to authenticate every piece. They contacted museums across China and established a partnership with the Palace Museum in Beijing and the Shanxi History Museum. The artifacts would be donated, but with conditions Victoria insisted on. Each piece would be displayed with information about the archaeologists who had saved them during the Cultural Revolution. Wang Chunming's name would be honored. The courage of those who had protected China's heritage during its darkest period would be remembered. Victoria funded the entire authentication process herself, using a portion of her divorce settlement. She hired conservators, paid for carbon dating, covered travel expenses for experts who came to examine the collection. It cost her nearly $2 million. Emily thought she was crazy. You could have sold these privately and been set for life. Multiple lives. I'm already set for life, Victoria replied. I have enough. This isn't about money. Then what's it about? Victoria thought of Mrs. Wang, of the 12 wooden horses, of the woman she'd been 5 years ago standing in a penthouse feeling worthless. It's about finishing the journey, she said simply. The exhibition opened in Beijing on what would have been Mrs. Wang's 90th birthday. It was called Guardians of Heritage, the Wang Chenming Collection. The opening ceremony was attended by government officials, international scholars, and thousands of ordinary Chinese citizens who came to see their heritage protected and returned. Victoria gave a speech in fluent Mandarin. She talked about Mrs. Wang, about her grandfather, about the courage it took to protect these pieces when it would have been safer to let them be destroyed. She talked about how some journeys take generations to complete. Mrs. Wang taught me that wealth is not measured in what we own, but in what we protect for future generations, Victoria said, looking out at the crowd. She taught me that the greatest legacy we can leave is not money or property, but values, honor, integrity, the courage to do what's right even when it costs us everything. After the ceremony, a young woman approached Victoria. She was in her 20s, with Wang Shufen's eyes and graceful manner. "I'm Wang Lin," she said. "Mrs. Wang's granddaughter. I wanted to thank you for honoring my great-grandfather's legacy." "And my grandmother's. I should be thanking your family," Victoria said. "Your grandmother changed my life. She talked about you often in her last years. She said you reminded her of why she'd kept faith in humanity." Wang Lin smiled through tears. "She said you proved that not everyone chooses money over meaning." They embraced, two women connected by a legacy of choices, by a wooden horse, by the understanding that some things matter more than profit. That evening, Victoria stood alone in the exhibition hall after it closed. She walked through the displays, seeing centuries of Chinese history protected and preserved. 473 pieces that could have been sold for tens of millions of dollars. 473 pieces that were now priceless because they were home. Her phone buzzed. A message from Patricia Chun, her lawyer, who'd become a close friend over the years, saw the news coverage. "You donated $30 million worth of artifacts? You're completely insane and I love you for it." Victoria smiled and typed back. "Not $30 million. Priceless. There's a difference." She took one last walk through the exhibition before leaving. Near the entrance, in a place of honor, were the 12 wooden horses reunited. The guardian set complete, watching over this new collection, watching over the journey that had finally reached its conclusion. Victoria paused before them, before her rabbit-marked horse, and she felt the same sensation she'd felt 5 years ago when she'd first discovered its value, not triumph, not vindication, just peace. The journey back to herself had led her here. To understanding that the greatest wealth is authenticity, that the highest value is integrity, that the most precious things in life are the ones that connect us to something larger than ourselves. James had built an empire on ego, and it had destroyed him. Victoria had built a life on values, and it had freed her. In the reflection of the display case, she saw herself. Not the scared woman in the penthouse. Not the lost girl trying to be someone else's definition of success, but herself. Finally, completely, authentically herself. "Thank you," she whispered to the 12 horses, to Mrs. Wang's memory, to the journey that had brought her here. "Thank you for showing me the way home." And in that moment, standing in a museum in Beijing, surrounded by artifacts that represented centuries of heritage, protected by courageous people who chose preservation over profit, Victoria Chun understood the final lesson. The journey never really ends. It just transforms, expands, becomes something larger than ourselves. And if we're very lucky, if we choose meaning over money and integrity over image, our journey becomes part of something eternal, something priceless, something that guards and guides others long after we're gone. Just like a small wooden horse with a rabbit mark carved 2,000 years ago, by an imperial craftsman protected through wars and revolutions, sold to a young woman searching for meaning, and finally, returned home to complete a journey that had taken 60 years, 3 generations, and 2,000 miles. The journey was complete, but its impact would echo for generations to come. And that, Victoria knew, was the true meaning of value. Victoria Chun's journey taught her that true wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in the legacy we leave. James Harrison learned too late that empires built on lies inevitably fall. Mrs. Wang Shufan understood that the greatest gift we can give is trusting someone else to carry our values forward. And 12 wooden horses, carved to guard one man's journey to the afterlife, ended up guarding something far more precious, the understanding That some things are priceless because they connect us to what matters most.